say welcome to our forum at the Essential Services Commission. And just as so you know, this is about the development of a land access code of practice today. Before we start, I do just want to acknowledge country, and so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. For myself, I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people here today. I just want to thank everyone for coming along to this this online forum. Appreciate it's at 5:30, and so hoping that allows more people to be participating in it. But in any case, thank you for your time as well in this forum, and appreciate many of you have been part of our engagements in the past as well. So appreciate all the time that you've been putting into that too. Just a really quick introduction from myself. My name is Aaron Nguyen. I'm the Senior Regulatory Manager of Analysis and Reform in our Energy Division at the Commission. So I oversee the changes or the making of energy rules as they apply in Victoria. We have a few people from the Commission here today. From our project team, we have Jean-Paul and Sukhmani who are assisting with this project. But we also have our CEO, John Hamill, and Sarah Shepherd, our Executive Director in Energy too, which I'll introduce soon as well. We also have Catherine from the Energy Water Ombudsman of Victoria too. So special thank you for attending as well. Just before I ask John to make some opening remarks, just in terms of what today is all about, this is really our first touch point with you as we begin our development of a land access code of practice, which I'll talk about in more detail as well. This is really the first point where we just want to reach out to stakeholders. There's going to be many other touch points or different ways you can engage with us along the way. So don't feel the need to put it all on this one. There's lots of other opportunities as well in the coming months. Today, what we're going to talk about is ourselves as the Essential Services Commission and what our role is in terms of land access and transmission. Provide you an overview of our previous work or our recent work in this space of land access, mainly through what's called a statement of expectations that we developed this year. We're also going to talk about some of the reporting that we've seen, and what we're really keen to hear about is your experiences in that space. And then we want to provide you some information about this project of the Land Access Code, some key project timings, some key questions that we might have that you can engage with us now and even later, and talk about how you can do that too. But before I go on, I'm just going to pass over to John Hamill, our CEO, who was involved in a lot of our work for the statement of expectations in the last few months, just to provide some comments as well before we start.
Yeah, look, thanks, Aaron. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of that I'm on today, which is the lands of the Wurundjeri people as well, and any elders past, present, and emerging who might be with us today, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands wherever you're on as well. And also particularly like to acknowledge Catherine Wolfhuizen, who's here with us today. And she's the new Ombudsman for EWOLF, so it's really great to have her along the journey. And obviously, as we all know, for those of you who are here today from previous parts of our process, the Ombudsman plays a really critical role in this space in terms of dealing with disputes. And we're really keen to hear about your experiences with the Ombudsman, and I'm sure Catherine will be really interested in hearing as well. I'd really like to thank everyone who's come this evening. As you know, I was really interested and involved in the first stage of this project, where we were creating a statement of expectations, and really that was about making sure that we could move with speed on getting some progress in this area. And we're really interested in hearing how that's gone and learning as much as we can from the experiences of the last few months around how the land access work has gone and what we can learn from it in terms of building it into a code of practice that can be really an important part of the future of transmission development in Victoria more broadly in the future. As we know, there's a huge need to grow transmission lines and in the future, and so it's not just about the one project. So I'm here just to listen really today and really hand over to Aaron, who'll be taking the lead. And I really do appreciate it. It's great to see some of our stakeholders who were involved in the early process here today again. So it's great to see you all here. And I really appreciate the fact that you were taking this time to participate in that process. And I'll hand back to Aaron.
Thanks, John. And so from here, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the previous work that we've done, open up some space for conversation and discussion and questions, and then talk about the Land Access Code project, some of the scope that we're thinking through and some of the early thinking we've got, and then have another discussion point for that too. So that's largely how today is going to unfold. If you have any questions along the way, please just shout out. You can raise a hand, you can type a question in the chat box, or you can turn your video on and just wave, and I'm happy to pause and take questions or have a discussion along the way. So feel free to do that anytime as we go through. Just as John said, a really key aspect of what we want to hear and what this forum is about is hearing from you, actually. Hearing about your experiences, particularly since the release of our statement of expectations about land access, but also any initial thoughts you might have on the Land Access Code, which we'll go through, and I can give you a bit more context before we unpack that as well. So just as a recap for those who don't know who the Essential Services Commission is, we are Victoria's independent regulator for essential services. We actually regulate a number of different areas, including water, things like taxis and ports, as well as a local government, and administer the Victorian Energy Upgrades Scheme. But for the energy sector, we regulate Victorian energy companies, and we do that through a number of different means. One is through licensing of energy businesses. We also make and administer the Victorian energy rules that are specific in Victoria, which is what we're talking about here today, the Land Access Code of Practice. We monitor market performance and look at the conduct of energy businesses. And we also have a compliance and enforcement role against those energy rules in Victoria. And we do this either by assisting energy businesses' voluntary compliance with the rules, but also through enforcing those rules where necessary as well. And I'll talk a bit about that late as we go as well. I referred to a thing called the Statement of Expectations of Transmission Companies. Now, many of you may be familiar with this already, but for those who don't know, this year we developed a statement of expectations, which really sets out expectations on transmission companies about the way they should be accessing land, particularly when using powers under the Electricity Industry Act, and that's captured under Section 93 of that Act. Now, back in December 2021, we did hear concerns about the way that AusNet Services was accessing private land, and so one way to look at that was to develop a statement of expectations about access to that land. And throughout that time, much of our focus was, and there was already a foreshadowing of developing an enforceable code of practice for this purpose too. For those who may not know, the statement of expectations has a series of principles in it, and in a way, you can categorize those principles into 4 different categories or groups that you can see on this slide here. The first 2 categories are about the approach to communication and engagement, or the processes for communication and engagement. So that's really about reasonable notice periods, keeping records of when you access, when you communicate, and even just early consultation and engagement along the way too. The third group is about the actual management of impacts when you access that land. This is talking about implementing relevant controls when you're accessing land, making sure employees and contractors have meeting the requirements that's needed before accessing that land, and minimizing the general impact on landowners too. And the fourth is about managing complaints and disputes effectively and fairly. I'm not going to go through all these in more detail, but they're all available on our website as well. But if you have any questions specifically on the principles, feel free to let me know. But effectively, there's 22 principles that fall under these 4 categories, and they have some examples as well of what meeting those principles would look like as well. So that was our statement of expectations. It's expectations we have on transmission companies, but not formal enforceable obligations as yet. One part that we did introduce as part of this project was a requirement for AusNet to report to us their performance against these statement of expectations. And these reports are now available online. They're public. They are on our website. If you can't find a link to that, please let us know. We can send you a link, but I think it's part of some of the information that we've already sent to you already. Basically, the requirement is to report monthly to us about their performance. Much of it is going to help improve transparency on land access processes, but also to help inform the development of our land access code of practice, which we're here to talk about today. AusNet provide us a confidential and public report each month, and the public report is the one that you can find on our website today. Much of the confidential information is just redacted to preserve the personal identity of landowners and details as well. So just as a very quick summary, if you haven't been able to see those reports, this is trying to capture a lot of that information into one slide. So you can see here in the last 6 months between June and November, what's been reported to us is the access of land 47 times. And this is through voluntary agreements. 5 accesses of land have been occurring under the use of Section 93 powers. And you can see that there's been 4 complaints relating to those Section 93 accesses that's been made to EWOV, so the Ombudsman. Just a note from our side, we do cross-check these complaints, and we do speak with staff at EWOV just regarding those to ensure that there's a link between the two. And you can see the third dot point, the complaints have largely been related to issues with communication during land access or insufficient information prior to access as well. We do try and, one of the main areas we look for in terms of information is about any breakdowns in communications that we can see between AusNet and landowner holders, and we're keen to hear about what those experiences are. We have also wanted to reach out to landowners who have gone through the experience of their land being accessed, whether by powers of Section 93 or not, just to sense check that experience. And if you know anyone or you have had that experience, please feel free to reach out to us as well. We'd love to hear about your experience and talk through that too. So please reach out to us anytime with that. I might just pause there if there's any questions before I move on.
I've got a question there. Thanks, Aaron.
Yes.
Conroy.
Hi, Arch.
How do you measure that 47 access, voluntary access? How does that measured?
So this is a literal report of number of times that has been accessed. So this is coming from AusNet, so this is how many times they've accessed that land over the course of 6 months. That's what that number represents.
So is it 47 different owners, 47 different titles, or the one person 47 times?
That's a very good question. I might just 47 different parcels of land is
so different titles. So
yep.
One owner could own 10 of those different parcels, and that owner could not give consent. However, AusNet and or their contractors have still come onto their property.
I believe this is reported from AusNet as being ones that have been access voluntarily and not through the use of powers in that sense. If
But
there is,
I think that's where the sticking point is, because they threaten the landowners that they're going to use the powers, and they've come on anyway without actually using the powers of the Section 2093.
right,
So-
okay. Yeah, okay. So that's something we can follow up on. And Arch, if you have any specific information that you can share with us, please do so as well, in that space as well. And if
Thanks.
anyone from AusNet is here as well, please feel free to respond to. But thanks, Arch, for raising that. All right.
I'll just read that. Still take me a while to read through it because I'm on a phone.
That's okay. No, completely.
So,
please.
Number of times access under Section 93 is 5. Number of compensation claims. Is that claims made or is that claims paid?
I believe that's claims made. So that's reported as 0 right now, at least for the last 6 months.
I've made claims against them.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. Was it between that period? This is more just sense checking, making sure we're getting this right. Was that between June and November this year, or was that prior? It's okay if you don't know on the spot, but
yeah, it could have been prior.
Yeah, so
but it's been going on for a long time. So
understood. No, but that's useful context. I think if you'd like to reach out to us, Arch, we're happy to speak to you on a one-on-one basis as well. If there's more information that you can share as well, happy to do so.
Yeah, I still want to be able to make the point so that this is entirely one-sided information getting shared, and unless we speak up during this conversation, our reports aren't really heard by the other participants.
Completely. Yeah, completely. And yeah, just to stress, this is reporting that's coming from AusNet. And so I think part of the purpose here is to just show you what's being reported to us. And part of what we can do in this forum is exactly what you're saying, and to hear your own experiences on the ground too.
So do you report on the complaints you receive from the public then? Is that captured in this?
No, so we haven't received any direct complaints just yet at the Commission. So we haven't reported on that. These are more complaints that have gone either to the Ombudsman or to AusNet directly related to Section 93 access. So that's the scope of the reporting, so to speak.
Righto.
Great questions, though. And it's a useful segue to this point as well. At this point, I just want to pause and give space for everyone to ask questions or share experiences too, just as Arch had raised. What we're seeing obviously is getting a report. What we're seeing is reported from AusNet. What gives life to that, or what helps us understand that further, is your own experiences too. So here's just some prompting questions that might help a bit of a discussion. And part of the reason why we're asking this is it could help us think through what are the areas of focus we have when making our land access code of practice. So that's one of the reasons why we're asking this. The other reason is also just to ensure that some of the expectations we have that we've set out is actually being met too. So 3 general questions that might help a conversation. What's your experience been of land access following the release of Statement of Expectations earlier this year in June? Are there certain aspects of the statement that you've found most useful, or are there any aspects of the statement that you might find problematic or difficult to work through as well? So just some open questions, and I'll just pause there if there's any reflections that anyone wants to share. Feel free to use the chat or speak as well.
I'm just trying to find, Archie back again, I'm just trying to find an email I said, but we had trouble with AusNet when they're going to say they had a permission under the section, or authorisation under the Section 93, and we asked them to prove it and stuff like that. And we had a bit of I think the Commissioner or someone put a stay on it until more information was given. So we weren't allowed to make contact with each other, for a week or 10 days. And then we're getting text messages from the land access agents telling us, make our decision, hurry up, because we've got to move on with the project. And I made a complaint to ESV, and it was told to go back to AusNet, but I don't think I've found anything yet, and I can't find it on my emails. And that would have been between June and November this year.
Right. Okay. So there's a bit to unpack there. I think one thing is something we can just take offline as well, is just to ensure where your complaint is being raised, it's being followed through as well. And
it was to the ESV.
To ES.
ESV.
So ourselves, or is it?
Yeah.
I just want to check.
Yes, yourselves.
Okay, we might check that through.
I think, Aaron, if I could
yes, but
just jump in, I think actually this is just exactly the conversation that we want to have. So this is the information that AusNet is reporting, and part of the reason tonight for this forum is to test the accuracy of this information. So that's really great that you're providing us with, some.
Sorry.
And certainly if anyone else also, I don't know, Aaron, do you want to go back to that previous slide with the
Sure.
number of complaints?
It was to Merrin Wilson.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Mary's not here tonight, but we work with her, and so.
Yeah, so I've got the correspondence ID and everything. And
yeah.
that was on the 2nd of August, so it would have happened before that, the week leading up to the 2nd of August.
Okay, great. So what we're trying to do, and look, I appreciate this is really confusing because there's a lot of government bodies involved, but what we're trying to do here is come up with a regime, and that's what we're really going to be working on with turning this into a code of conduct, is figure out what is the best way for landowners to try to resolve disputes that they have with transmission companies. So in this case, AusNet. Each government body has a different role, and I know it's confusing, and that's why we're all here together. So Catherine's here, we're here, we're all trying to listen. And we want to see whether it works by having complaints go to the Ombudsman, who's Catherine, and because they are a dispute resolution body. And so we're really keen to hear experiences from people who have made complaints to EWOF, because you can see that last row there, it says that there's been 4 complaints. And then the one above it, has anyone complained to AusNet? It sounds like, Archie, that you might have, and we'll follow up with you about why that hasn't been reported here. And AusNet told us that they would implement some internal dispute resolution processes to make sure that when someone comes in to complain, that complaint is being managed in an appropriate way. So again, we're really keen to hear if that's worked, so that we can feed that in to thinking about what should be in this code, which is a more formal piece of regulation that will attract penalties if the transmission companies breach it. So sorry to jump in, Aaron, I just thought that might be some useful.
But there might be a disconnect between AusNet and its contractors.
Yeah.
Because all we're dealing with all the time is the contractors.
Yeah.
Short term, 6 months, whatever they're on, performance managed and stuff like that. So they're out there to make sure that they get their meet their performance indicators. But there's no empathy or sympathy or consideration given to the landowners. So when we talk to them, we get a answer that's wrote down for them to reply with. We cannot ever talk to an AusNet person. And if we do, if we happen to get the AusNet, I know from myself that I've wrote 4 letters and gave them to the person, the AusNet representative, and still haven't heard nothing back from them. It's just like we're wasting our time all the time.
Yeah.
And we come to this forum, and I'm glad it's happening, but it's probably about 5 years too late for us. But it's been like trying to shut the door after the horse is bolted. There's that much damage done out here to the communities now, of neighbours and friends and family members and stuff like that. And although, you know, we make complaints to the EWOV, and they say we've raised that with AusNet and they've changed their ways, but it's too late. What's about all the damage and mental health issues that are done in the meantime? Just saying you're sorry doesn't make the pressure that people are under, the financial strain they're under, and even their relationship pressure they're under. It's not making that go away, making it go any better. And we're not even considered as stakeholders. That's the worst part. So we have a stakeholder engagement forum, and we sit up here, and there's no body representing us except for a few of us that try to make the time to get on this, because we're all trying to make a living as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, I really do mean it's good that it's happening, but it's not user friendly to the stakeholders, the landowners, or the community groups who are affected by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and as part of the user friendliness, I think that's the aspect that we're looking through in terms of, and we'll go through, I think we might move to the next few slides about what this land access code could focus on, and that's about being a bit more precise and descriptive about these obligations, because that's what we can put into place for going forward.
And I think, you know, to say we really hear you, and we really hear the pain that communities have gone through, and we're really listening, and I really hear you, and thank you for coming along. And we do, really hear how painful it's been.
But we do that. We hear that. It's like going through cancer. We hear it's painful, and there's probably not much good at the end of it. It's going to end up in a bad situation, but nothing's doing anything to help us.
Yeah.
So if you have a Section 93 access legislation, does that apply to greenfields easements? If there's no infrastructure owned by any energy company in a greenfield estate or easement, how can the Section 93 Act apply to it?
So just so Section 93 is a power that transmission companies have to access land for various purposes. So it doesn't really distinguish between greenfields and brownfields. Archie, is there something more specific about it you wanted to?
Well, I can understand if you've got infrastructure in place and you want to get onto your property, someone's property, to check, survey, build, or renew something that's already in place. But to gain access onto a person's property where there's no infrastructure there in place and come onto it, I find that very hard to believe that this Section 93 legislation applies to it.
Oh, right. No, sorry. I do want to clarify. It does absolutely apply to Section 90 to greenfields. Sorry, Archie. I do want to make it clear. This is a power that the government has legislated that is there for transmission companies. So there's no doubt that it does apply to greenfields. So I just want to make that clear. And there was a comment in the chat.
So the chat's from Josh. That says, on behalf of farmers, biosecurity issues and payment, as well as access and the effect on mental health, are all major considerations. And yes, we hear that. Josh, feel free to speak further about or expand on that further as well. But I'm hearing biosecurity for biosecurity concerns, the payment needs and access, which is, I think, very relevant here, are things that we should think through going forward too. We can go through a bit more detail about that the next few slides as well.
Our elderly next door neighbour got a phone call from AusNet. They're going to come onto his property, or land access agents. So he's called me to come up and give him some support. And they got very, vocal towards him. He said, if you don't let us on, we're going to come on anyway. So it doesn't matter what you say, we're still going to come on, whether it's today, tomorrow, or next week. And I said, don't agree to it. We'll move it to the next stage where they've got to force access and all this sort of stuff. And he said, no, I'm over it. I'm 84 years old. I can't handle anymore. The phone calls, the text messages, the emails that they send to his daughters is just building up, and I just want to go. And I said, well, make some arrangements that if they come on, follow some guidelines. So he said, well, you're not allowed to bring cars on. You can let her walk in. Someone, owner's got to be there in place when they come on. You just can't have willy-nilly access without the owner being there. They said, yep, righto, we'll do that. So we'll go away today and we'll come back tomorrow. So I went past the next day because Joe rang up and said he couldn't be there. They drive around the paddock in the cars after they said the day before they wouldn't make access with the cars. And I called him up and said, you're not supposed to do that. He goes, well, it's not your property. It's got nothing to do with you. We'll do what we want. And that's the sort of bullying tactics we're getting put up with all the time. It's just, and no one cares. Sitting up here and say we're going to have a code of conduct, it doesn't protect us from the past or the future. People getting knocked off gates, people getting spied on. Another neighbour just down the road got rung up by a land access officer. So when can you come? He said, I'm at work, and she's got a driveway going up to her house. And the land access goes, are you sure you're at work? She goes, yeah, why would I say otherwise? Goes, because I can see you driving up your driveway because you're lying to me. And she's that frightened now. Where are these people hiding around the place spying on her to see where she is? So we sit up here and make out, this is really good, but the things that are happening out here in these communities are atrocious and even criminal.
I can hear that, Archie. I think one thing is we're definitely going to bring this to AusNet, I think, in terms of the experience that you've heard and saying...
And witnessed.
Yeah. And
intimidation. They get up there in front of your face with a camera on, try to bait people to step out of their own personality, to become a person they don't even want to be, to try and protect their rights and their interests, bait them so that they swear and carry on, say something wrong, and next minute they're up for some sort of, bad behaviour. And we just live in normal lives up here, just looking after ourselves, trying to make a living, trying to make sure everything goes along, protecting our environment, protecting our lives, protecting our financial future and our family's future. And we're getting destroyed mentally, physically and financially by these people and these companies. And there's no one there to stand up for us and be an umpire or say, whoa, stop, this is not right.
I hear you. Is there, one thing I think, I'm thinking more about the code and how to actually set the right terms, I guess, of engagement. Is there, would there be a way that would be avoided? Like what would that process be like if proper engagement looked like, if you could see it that way?
Well, proper engagement at the start would be involved with the stakeholders, putting that in a paper 3 years ago or 5 years ago, saying that we're looking at putting a transmission line in a paper that's in Melbourne, that no people up here don't buy papers anymore. Most of us don't have internet access. I've had to drive down the road to get on the phone to get access to get onto this forum here tonight. And then 3 years later, we get a knock on the door saying we're going to put a transmission line through your property. And they said, well, what's all this coming? Oh, it was in the paper. These people have known about it for years, and the government and everyone, even yourselves probably, and not one person come to involve us right from the start. And we're the ones that are going to carry the most of the burden of it. There's 200 kilometres of individual landowners stretching from Melbourne to Ararat just in this alignment alone, and we're not even considered stakeholders in the whole process. All we are is labelled as people anti-renewable, want us trying to stop progress, we want to do this, you don't want green energy and all this sort of stuff. We're not those people, but you're branding us like that and you make us look bad, and that takes more effect on us because that's not who we are.
And I can appreciate that's how you feel. I think what we're trying to do here is create obligations in a code that is going to provide that clarity. That's the purpose here.
Yeah, but how do we get involved with stakeholders though? How are we even considered as a stakeholder?
Well,
the next 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines are going to get built. How are all those individual property owners going to be involved as being a stakeholder in this project or these projects?
And I think this is the purpose of forums like this, to be able to contribute and provide that feedback so that we can inform what we're doing. And we do want to find that information as well. There's lots of different ways we can try and capture that information, but this is one of those steps as well.
There's one of the steps. And involve us as stakeholders. How do we get involved as stakeholders in the project?
I think the key one is to reach out to us directly. We've got some contact details for us as well directly that you can to be involved in this. We're happy to meet individually on these sorts of matters or talk on the phone as well. But we also have a submissions process that we can talk through as well.
Yeah, but I'm talking about a stakeholder in the whole project, not only just a stakeholder in this discussion that's happening tonight, a stakeholder in the whole project that's started 5 years ago. There's more emphasis put on the township of Bland to see what their benefits they're going to get on it out of this project than what the poor old person who is going to be financially, physically and mentally destroyed by the project. But they go around and swell the whole population against the few are fighting to protect their livelihoods.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Aaron, I wonder, sorry, I might just add something into this. I appreciate the concerns and the things that everyone probably has learned about the need to engage early in the projects that are coming. I guess in terms of where we're at with this, one of the other things about this code of conduct that hopefully will help, it certainly doesn't answer all the questions that you're raising, the very important questions that you're raising about engagement in projects overall, but one of the outcomes of the code of conduct as a code rather than a statement of expectations, which is what it has been before, is that it will become enforceable. So that kind of essentially ups the ante in terms of AusNet's accountability. So I think one of the things that we would like to kind of encourage everyone in terms of participating today is to think about it from that perspective, in addition to providing dispute resolution mechanisms through EWOV to try and resolve things quickly. If there are serious issues that happen in terms of behaviour, there's potential consequences that will come once we get the code of conduct in place. So that's, I think, a positive development in this, in terms of making sure that we're taking the whole issue seriously, and it will also flow through into future projects as well. So I just thought it might be worth just highlighting that for everyone in the audience today. I know it doesn't address your broader questions about engagement in projects, but that's, for good or for ill, outside of the specific scope of what we can do in this project. But I'll hand back to you, Aaron, in terms of maybe where we're at in the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, John. And maybe I'll go to that actually and just speak about the project that we're doing now, because that might help frame some of the points that we can talk about as well. So just going on from what John said, in terms of the Land Access Code of Practice, what we're referring to now, John raised a good point about how it's different from the Statement of Expectations now. And so really, if you see those 4 dot points below, the Land Access Code of Practice is really focused on Section 93 access. It will be related to new transmission projects, but the key thing here is that it would be enforceable, which means there's potential penalties for non-compliance, or if there's a breaking of those rules in the code, the Commission has the powers to enforce that. The last dot point as well is when you're enforcing, or when we are thinking about the enforcement of obligations, we want to make sure those rules are prescriptive rather than principles-based. The broader, I guess, you make those obligations, the trickier that is to enforce, so to speak. And if we can make that more specific or process related that actually allows enforcement to occur stronger as well. I just want to give you some context before we go about what our approach is to making new energy rules, which is what our team is mainly focused on in this regard. The first point is about stakeholder engagement, and we do that through many different means. We can do one-on-one meetings, and very open to having conversations with you in that regard through these public forums, but also through written feedback. We use one approach where you can do that is through our Engage Victoria website, but you can also send through a letter as well if that's needed, or your approach that you prefer to. But in a very formal sense, the way we do our work is through the publishing of reports that we seek feedback on. So one thing that you'll see here is a draft decision and a final decision. The draft decision is basically a report that we release that sets out what are the different obligations that we're going to introduce it, why are we doing that, and then seek specific feedback on those proposed changes. So it's a draft, it's there for something tangible that you can engage with and provide written feedback to. And then following that, once we've seen and considered everyone's feedback, we then make a final decision to it as well. As we go about designing those rules, we consider our objectives under our Essential Services Commission Act as well. So that makes us think through things like the cost and benefits associated with the new obligations that we make, but also just thinking through, can we set obligations and rules that are actually addressing some of the problems that we see. So in the case of the Land Access Code, that would be about the access of land. Just wanted to make...
Can we go back a slide?
This one?
No, one back, one more.
This one, yep.
It says there in the second dot point down the bottom, Land Access Code will relate to new transmission projects. Is our project defined as a new project or a new transmission project?
Yeah, yes, it will be. So in terms of there's nothing there right now, and they're thinking of putting in a transmission project, so that's what it would apply to.
Got it. Thanks.
That's all right. So just going to we talked about the enforceability or enforcing the code and its obligations. This is a summary of the way we go about our compliance and enforcement actions that we currently do as a commission. This is referred to as the compliance and enforcement pyramid. You can see at the top is sort of the heaviest handed approach to enforcement. That might be the removal of a license. And then you go down to the yellow, and the range of enforcement actions that we could potentially take are things like penalties of an energy business to taking them to court as well. And on the bottom of the pyramid is about ways that we can actually assist energy companies to actually make sure they comply in a voluntary way. And so that could be through education, but also through remediation actions that they take. So that gives you a sense of the different tools that the Commission has access to when it comes to compliance and enforcement. And the Code of Practice allows the access for these tools to follow up any of those obligations that potentially get breached or broken. One thing I just wanted to focus on is about the areas that the Land Access Code of Practice could really focus on in terms of the key issues. And early in our consultation for the statement, these are the issues that came out as some of the strong issues that we should focus on. And we think it's probably going to be just as relevant for the Land Access Code as well as we develop it. And some of those are the issues that we've talked about even here right now in this forum. So the first one is about transparency of information and getting that in a clear and timely way, and also about what type of access is actually entailed, or the processes with it. The second group of dot points is about sufficient notice to access land, but also the flexibility of accessing land, the dates around access to accommodate the needs of the the land and the property that's in place. The third is about staff and contractor behaviour, whether that's through proper training and education, particularly about accessing farmland. And we are very cognizant that the land that is relevant may have its own specific needs, so having an understanding about that, and also following specific biodiversity rules of property too. And then the final dot point about having effective dispute resolution and complaints handling processes, whether that's internal to the transmission business or external as well. So those were the areas of the key areas of issues that we heard through the development of the statement of expectations and even now today. So I just wanted to test that that's still relevant. Those are still the key issues that we should focus on for the Land Access Code as well. So if anyone has any comments at that point. Lisa, you've got your hand up.
Thank you for that. I'm just wondering, is that a typo in the slide? Because I know Farmers Federation was very clear about biosecurity rules of the individual property
Yes.
rather than biodiversity.
Yeah, that's correct. Biosecurity.
Thank you.
Just a question on the biosecurity rules. In the statement of expectations, it was a fairly watered down biosecurity expectation. If Section 93 is enacted, is the property that they are enacting Section 93 on, are they obliged to follow the biosecurity plans of that property, or can they basically go back to their statement of expectation, wash down the mudguards and clean their tyres?
So I think you raise a really good point. And this is about the level of detail that you can introduce in these obligations. So just stepping back, when we're designing rules or obligations in the code, they may not be able to address every single type or different type of land that you might encounter. And so we've just got to find that balance there as we develop it. So we don't have any set ideas of how you actually prescribe that yet, and that's something that we're going to work through. I think
I think there needs to be an obligation if there is a biosecurity plan in play and you're enacting a Section 93, that the company needs to follow the biosecurity plan that is implemented on that property. So a grazing property is going to have a different biosecurity plan than a horticultural property or a potato growing property, because they have different biosecurity concerns and emphasis on their properties. So to have a blanket one over a whole system, and this is only 192 kilometres, but when we're talking 10,000 kilometres of transmission networks, we need to be observing, because we're under obligation and legislation that requires us to have our biosecurity plans in play. Yet if Section 93 comes through and they're allowed to go back to the statement of expectations biosecurity plan, that overrides the legislative plans of biosecurity that we have got implemented on our properties here.
And I think a key part of that obviously is the access that a transmission company or whichever energy business it is to actually have that plan and be in that engagement with the landowner, so that those discussions can be made through. So I think that's the preferred outcome, is that the transmission company or the energy business is being able to have that dialogue and talk through that engagement plan or that biosecurity plan and factor that in. I think the Land Access Code will, when you hypothetically think it through, there will need to be some sort of prescriptive obligation or some sort of obligation that says something has to be there in the absence of anything being discussed as well. So what that specifically is in that fallback position is something we have to unpack.
Okay, so in a lot of the scenarios that where transmission lines are going through, they're generally running through large business structures themselves. So a business entity has, well, a lot of money at play. Now, under this proposal at the moment, if I'm subjected to a transmission line driving through my place and I'm subjected to a multinational company coming through my property, my initial response is actually to have a lawyer involved, because the economic impact of a situation like this is quite substantial. Now, at the state of play that is happening at the present stage, if I have a lawyer involved, the proponent will not engage with me. They will not come to part with any more than $1,000 in legal fees to actually for something that's going to be potentially a multi-million-dollar impact on a business. Now, yes, when we get to compulsory acquisition or anything, yes, they start talking legal fees, but the proponent is actually walking onto a property, statement of expectation saying that the landowner is obliged to actually consult with the proponent and basically give IP to them for nothing. No other business would give intellectual property to a proponent or someone else for nothing, and not even get legal representation paid for something that is actually not something we've sought, something that is being us. As business owners and landowners, I would be expecting that there's some form of legal representation in due respect to biosecurity, in due respect to them crawling over your place, in due respect to you giving advice of potentially a movement across your property from one spot to another. A legal advice, the $1,000 doesn't even open a lawyer's door in legal representation in a situation where this is potentially a multi-million-dollar impingement on your business.
I hear that. The current statement actually sort of sets out that the transmission company is actually to consult about the property specific needs and get the details of what they need to follow before accessing that land. So whether it's implementing systems to check for active biosecurity incidents or adopt certain practices in coming on. So I think what we're probably interested in is, are you seeing that happening right now? Is that, are you getting the question of what do we need to do to access the land? Are there certain steps we need to follow? Are you able to have that dialogue? Is that practice even happening today? I think that'd be useful for us to know.
Well, that practice is not happening today, because when we did put those things in place to try and negotiate a more cooperable access, they said, no, we'll do what we think is minimum or maximum. And then when they, under another neighbours not far from our place, when they did access to it and the overseas owners finally got them off, I said, you got to wash your boots before you leave now, because they wash them before you get in. And they said, stuff it, who cares about your biosecurity? So they're treating it all as a joke. And we're the ones who are going to lose at the end of it. Those transmission lines might not come in here, but if we get a disease in our livestock that we sell overseas for export, the whole market's gone from us.
Yeah, and look, if that is happening under the
That
statement,
is happening.
Yeah,
it's happening right up to now.
And have you been able to make a complaint to AusNet, or if that's failed, have you been able to reach out to EWOV as well?
We
at this
have.
point?
It's currently going through EWOV at the moment. And when we raise it, they raise it with AusNet, and I said, yeah, we've taken that board and we've done these measures, but it's too late. No shutting the gate after everything's gone.
Yep. Thanks for the feedback, Archie. We'll look into that, I think. I'm just going to pause there and just conscious of time as well. But
Did you want to read out there was another message in the chat, Aaron? So I might just read that one out if you breathe out.
yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
So Josh from Victorian Farmers Federation, who I think his internet is struggling a little bit, he has said in the chat, for many people, the outcome of planning and creation of this transmission network is as serious as life itself. Having a series of transmission lines going through a farm can potentially ruin the entire business and exceptionally fertile land. These flow-on effects may be severe locally and even internationally, given that Victoria exports a considerable amount of the produce created here, and certain produce has to be created in certain regions. So thanks, Josh, for that comment. That's really useful. And if you do want to follow up with us when your internet's perhaps a bit better, or we can talk on the phone, old school way, then that would be good. I mean, I think there's a lot of issues in there about the project itself, and certainly we're hearing a lot of concerns about the project itself, in and of itself, and then potentially you might be raising biosecurity issues as well. So happy to talk about both of them.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to some of those biosecurity plans and acknowledging those processes as well, and the importance of that, I think, is the link. So we hear that. I've just put these questions up on the slide. These are sort of the type of feedback we'd like to hear. Very much of what we're hearing today, making sure that we're focusing on the key issues to address the development of our code, and also thinking about how prescriptive we can be with obligations as well. But again, this is sort of the first touch point as we embark on this project. So there's going to be a few more ways that you can engage with us, either just even outside of this meeting, just to reach out to us, but also we'll have a few more of these type forums and information that you can feed back to as well. Just going to pause there before I go into this next slide, before I come to the next steps. And if you have any comments or questions or any feedback, just following all that I've said so far, please feel free to let me know now.
And so there's some people on the line that Joe and Nathan and Vicky and a whole bunch of people that we worked with in developing the statement of expectations. And even if you don't want to speak now, we're really keen to hear how it's actually gone and from your perspective. So but appreciate now might not be the right time, but certainly keen to speak with you.
Yep. So just next steps, just conscious that from the next few weeks, people might be quite busy and the like, so we can feel free to touch base with us in January and the like as well, where we'll reach out again from there too. The plan is to release a draft.
Can I just make a statement?
Oh yes, sure. Please do.
We always say we're busy because it's leading up to Christmas, New Year and stuff like that. But the farmers and the people that are on here, we're all trying to make a living. We're trying to get crops in, make hay, get the headers out in the paddocks, get the sheep sold before they all get fly blown, repair the damage to the fences and that. Our lives don't stop just because your time frames are put in there. We've got time frames that change every day. So it's very hard. The next 2 weeks isn't Christmas and New Year for us. It's trying to get on top of all the work that's been put off for the last 6 weeks because of the widespread rain and damage that's been done. So you've got to be more realistic and more sympathetic to the views of the country people out there, because it's not Christmas for us. This is the busiest time of the year financially, where we actually make our money that might get us through the next year. Yeah,
I completely understand. And I think what we want to do is create the time and space that you can meaningfully contribute to it. and completely cognizant of that. So if there's any ways that we can engage with you that works with you, please reach out, let us know how to do that. And through different forums, happy to be flexible for that. But I completely take your point there.
Aaron, Nathan speaking. And like, yes, we discussed this statement of expectation early on in the piece. And back then, my wife and I basically said it's warm and fluffy. And that hasn't really changed. It hasn't altered. I saw your pyramid. What triggers the different points of prosecution along the way? You make complaints to the Energy and Water Ombudsman. They're developing their rules and what they're able to do in the present stage. So a lot of the times they're hamstrung in what they can do and what they can chase around. So it's been an issue from the start. If there's a complaint, where do you go? You get sent to ESV, you get sent to the EWOV, you get sent to ACCC, and everyone's in a situation where their hands are tied because legislatively they can't do anything about it. So whether that's the level of consultation, whether that's access onto people's property illegally, whether there's a forceful access that has been experienced around this area and intimidation by the proponent, nothing's changed, and we don't see any of this. Yes, we got a pyramid, that's nice, but what triggers the next point of they've got to be pulled up? There's no one that is pulling them up. So we've got an Energy and Wind Commissioner who is liaising between AusNet and supposedly the stakeholders, and with no teeth or jurisdictional powers to do anything about it. So we sit here banging our heads against the wall because if we do make a complaint, it takes you 4 months, 5 months to actually get anywhere with anything, and then be dead-ended at the end of the day. So there's expectations. This is just to get onto your land, let alone the rest of the rest of the process that has been an absolute joke from the start. But there's no avenues for the affected communities and the affected landowners to actually put their hand up and go, this person's going to help us out and look after our interests and do something about it. So, we get the occasional sorry, but at the end of the day, yeah, we're listening to everyone, but not much seems to be happening.
This code is meant to set those obligations for the use of those Section 93 powers. That's its purpose, and that's why the Commission has its functions to enforce. So that's the point of that.
So when this comes out, as we move from statement of expectation into the rules, will there be a definition of what's deemed inappropriate and what path is taken, or is it just going to be self-reporting and continual, like what we saw early on in the slide, 5 accesses onto land under Section 93, 4 of them are going to EWOV. So what's the outcome? That's 80% that 80% of the land that has been accessed under Section 93 that people are complaining about. What's the next step in rectification there? And what's the proponent? Is the proponent publicly scorned over that, or are they prosecuted over that? What's the trigger points, and in which point is there trigger points, other than, oh yeah, no, sorry, we didn't do it right, we'll do it better next time, which is what we've heard for 2.5 years. Oh, we're improving that, but nothing changes in the meantime.
So as a very broad overview, when you have an obligation, and this is why it's important that we're designing these obligations the right way, and that's why we're consulting on it. if there is a potential break of those rules, the Commission can then investigate that and consider its enforcement actions from there. So that's the point of it. We can get that information either directly from consumers, yourselves, or through, it could be self-reported as well from a business, but that's not all we can get information from too. So that's the general process. Just conscious of time, but I do want to just make sure there's space if people have questions. I also received a direct question about work cover, legal liability. Where does a landowner stand if their land is accessed under Section 93 and transmission contractors suffer life-changing things on their property or the landowner refuses access during certain periods? It could be through carving. I think that's a question that we can explore through and think about for when we develop obligations. But I think that's something we can take offline too. All right. Just in terms of timings, the idea is that we have a draft land access code in April, which you can then provide feedback to, aiming for a final code of practice in July and August. Anytime over the next between now and then, you can reach out to us and talk to us about some of the experiences that you've seen or some of the ideas you might have as well. So my email address is available here as well as John Paul's, who's our Manager of Reform. In this slide, we'll also send these details out following this as well, if you're interested. But there's lots of different touch points that you can speak to us. And I just want to thank you actually as well for all your feedback today already. It's given us a lot to think through. There's lots that we've captured through as well. And we'll reach out as well for those who've reached out for some direct questions as well, just to follow up and have a conversation with you following this too. I might pause there and say thank you.
Sorry.
Yes. No, go for it.
I've had a lot to say, so thanks very much for being patient with us and stuff like that. Probably the things that I'd be looking for is that if there's a breach in the code of conduct, if it gets that far, how to report it, what's the time frames for any sort of remedial work or conciliation that's going to be done, what happens in the meantime when there's a breach and there's some sort of I suppose remedial action taking place. How many breaches constitutes the proponent to be escalated to a high level of disciplinary action? So they're the sort of things we'd be looking at. We don't want a toothless tiger. We want someone that's going to be plain in plain English to us as community members, that if this happens, this is the ramifications of it.
It's a really good point. And I think there's a lot of enforcement action that the Commission already does. And maybe in the next touch point that we have, we might actually bring some of our staff there just to talk through their processes and how that looks like. And this is sort of feeds into our thinking as we develop those obligations, because that's all part of it. That's what the enforceability of these obligations are all about as well. So, but it's a really, really good point what you've raised. All right, we might leave it there. I want to thank you everyone for your time again, and please do reach out to us anytime if you'd like to discuss further as well.